Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Commerce of Care podcast. We're your hosts, Sanjana and Anthony, and we are both students at Duke University, passionate about making lasting change in health. This podcast is your go-to space to explore all the ways you can impact healthcare beyond just wearing a white coat. Whether you're pursuing medicine, policy, business, or your own unique path, you belong here. So just sit back, relax, and let us show you the diverse perspectives shaping health today.
Today, we're happy to introduce our guest, Mihir Gandhi. Mihir is a tech executive with a history of leadership across mission-driven startup and growth stage technology and healthcare companies. He specifically focuses on strategy and operational excellence for companies building for global scale. He is currently the Senior Vice President of Telemedicine and Customer Experience at Him & Hers, the leading telehealth platform that focuses on destigmatizing health and delivering personalized healthcare solutions at scale. When not working, Mihir spends time hiking and playing board games with his family, playing basketball, watching Duke and San Antonio Spurs basketball games, and being proactively depressed by the annual imminent late-season collapse of the Dallas Cowboys. Mihir got his MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and his BA in Chemistry and Religious Studies from Duke University.
Mihir, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. Really excited to be on with you guys and to talk to you and the audience. A little bit about me. I live in the Bay Area now, but was born in India, raised in Texas, high school in Pittsburgh, obviously college at Duke, and have lived in, I think, 9 cities across America, and a couple cities internationally through work. But ultimately settled here in the Bay Area. It's a place where once I moved here and felt the pace of innovation and opportunity, was the place I knew I was going to settle. And so live here now with my wife and 2 kids who are 8 and 6, and diehard Duke basketball fans.
Oh yeah, I noticed that you're wearing a Duke shirt right now. Do you mind showing our audience a little bit?
Yeah, my friends joke with me that all the gear that I own are either free T-shirts from companies I've worked for or they've worked for, or Duke, and I think that's pretty accurate.
But I feel like
This actually was by accident, by the way. This is not designed.
Oh, really? You did that on accident?
Yeah.
Well, don't worry. I
Yeah.
think everything looks better when it's free anyway. So you're rocking it.
That's right.
Definitely.
But as a Duke alum, we were curious, how would you describe your undergraduate experience? And do you think that's been relevant to your current role?
Yeah, great question. I do think so. I think I graduated in 2001 during the .com bust, and in advance of that, part of this ties back to my background. Both my parents are PhDs in biochemistry. They moved to America with me to do their postdocs. And really, I come from a family of PhDs. I think each of their siblings are either PhDs or MDs. Each of them are married to PhDs or MDs. So come from a truly academic background. And when coming to Duke, I knew I would study chemistry. I just really enjoyed the subject, enjoyed the content a lot. However, when I got to Duke, I realized a lot of my friends were fairly multicultural and international, experiences that didn't really get to experience through undergrad or through high school and middle school. And it fostered a love for learning more about their cultures. One small note in there, I also played the violin very seriously. I was deciding between conservatory and college, in 11th grade. And so, that sort of diversity of my own background and experiences coming into college, I was super interested in religious studies. And I also knew that was a time in my life I'd never be able to study that again, right? I had to take advantage of that in the moment. Obviously, the religious studies department at Duke is fantastic. I think it did a few things for me. The first was really time management. I was heavily involved across a lot of extracurricular activities at Duke, whether it was, service leadership for the house I was a part of, shout out Wayne Manor, whether it was the South Asian Student Association, helped start a couple of clubs on campus, played a lot of basketball, like I think probably a lot of students do. But you combine that with the double major and time management becomes incredibly important. And you could argue maybe I didn't sleep enough in undergrad, but I don't think anyone thinks back on their college days and says, I wish I slept more. So my goal out of undergrad was really to maximize everything I could out of the experience. And I think that has been kind of a tone setter for my career.
That makes sense.
So you mentioned your interest in chemistry, and we just wanted to know, was there at any point in your undergraduate career that you thought about being a doctor, especially with the background of those that your family had in
Yeah, I
academia?
actually took my MCAT between junior and senior year, and was fairly certain I was either going to go to chemistry grad school or medical school. A lot of my friends who were a little bit older encouraged me to work for 1 or 2 years before going to med school,
Mhm.
and so I took their advice. What they generally said was people who take a couple years off have a better perspective on one, whether or not they want to go to med school. They don't feel forced down the path. But two, they're more prepared as students, and a bit more mature and a bit more understanding of kind of how to manage, multiple priorities at the same time. So I did that and worked at a company called the Advisory Board. Quick side story: I actually was going to go work at a lab at the University of Pittsburgh, in the Transplant Institute. And then a friend of mine said, "Hey, you should consider working at this consulting company called the Advisory Board in Washington, D.C. Send me your resume." And this was the middle of my senior year. I actually had no idea what a resume was at the time. And so I asked him, what's a resume? They said, just write down all the stuff you've done with bullet points and send it to me. And so that's quite literally what I did. I wish I saved the Word doc. It is literally just bullet points. No headers, no sections. It was just like a list of like accomplishments and activities, to give you a sense of kind of like where my starting point was in the quote unquote business world. You obviously don't need a resume when you're applying to graduate schools.
Mhm.
Um, Long story, I guess long at this point. He helped me format it. I ended up getting a job at the advisory board, and within a couple of years of working there, realized I really enjoy sort of the business aspect of healthcare. So I let my MCATs expire, continue to work across healthcare consulting before going to grad school.
That's awesome. And I'd be really interested to see how your resume from back then changes based on how your resume is now. So I'm
Yeah,
sure
I
there's
wish I
a
had it.
huge difference, but your formatting has improved a lot too. So that's definitely really cool. But you said that you went to grad school, and I'm pretty sure you went to what, Wharton, was it?
Yep,
So
I went to Wharton for my MBA.
so how was that experience like going in and studying for an MBA rather than medicine? What do you think you learned from that as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a couple aspects to it. I was in healthcare consulting at three different firms prior to business school. So I worked at the advisor board doing best practice research. I worked at a company called StockAmp doing revenue cycle management. Then I worked at a company called Chapter House doing health tech and payer strategy work. So part of what I was looking for was an MBA that had a healthcare focus. And quite candidly, I was between Fuqua and Wharton. I think they're the two best healthcare MBA programs when I went to school, um, and ultimately chose Wharton just to get a bit of a different experience from having been at Duke. Um, what I loved about it was it opened my perspective and my network to really launch me into the career that I'd had post MBA. Um, I graduated in 2010. Uh, I started in 2008, right during the bubble collapse. So
Oh, wow.
I have a penchant for being in school, I guess, when major catastrophic things happen, macroeconomically. Um, but going to that program, a part of my goal also was to help build my network across various sectors, coming from the healthcare industry or economy. I felt like everything I did and everyone I knew was really in healthcare. I wasn't sure that I wanted to stay in it for the rest of my career. And a big part of the goal was to build that network. Now, I think as an immigrant, my family, who primarily live in India at this point, um, aren't exactly folks who have the ability to help me navigate the things that I want to try to navigate in America and in business too. But part of the goal for me was to help build that network and help understand, what are the other avenues and possibilities that are out there for careers, career pathways, um, uh, experiences, and so forth. And so part of going to Wharton was it's different from Duke, right? It is just a different set of experiences. So let me go check it out, try it out.
I wanted to know, based on like the network that you might have built through, whether that be Duke or Penn, I wanted to know more about your introduction to him and hers and what your role looks like within the company.
Yeah. So at Hims and Hers, I run all of telemedicine, which is the entire set of clinical operations and customer facing operations across the entire business line. So that is across men's sexual health, dermatology, hair, mental health, weight loss for both Hims and Hers. Um, so think of it as everything from the moment you try to make a purchase decision through the life cycle of the customer.
And then on top of that, would you say that in terms of telemedicine, where have you seen a lot of that recent growth? And especially after COVID, do you think that that has really helped to propel the company and increase the need and awareness about telehealth and Hims and Hers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in 5 or 10 years, we're going to look back on the term telehealth and think it's fairly antiquated because it is becoming really just another way that consumers consume healthcare. It is something that prior to COVID-11 was still accelerating, but had some challenges associated with it. I think COVID was simply an accelerant, right? It was a time when people really felt that they could share their healthcare data a lot more freely. They were becoming more comfortable doing it virtually. It was fairly creative to the on-demand world, right? You think about sort of the Ubers and Lyfts of the world and the DoorDashes, where everything is becoming on demand. I need an answer right away, Amazon, so on and so forth. And there's no reason why that shouldn't apply to healthcare as well. And so, this general consumer mindset and shift away from let me schedule around the doctor to or let me go to the store when the store is open, or let me schedule a taxi and wait for them to come. All these things are changing to wait, you should be like revolving around me as the paying customer, right? Hims and Hers really thinks about it the same way. And you hear me talk about our customers as customers, not as patients, right? They are both. But at the end of the day, they are the reason why we are in business, and they are ultimately the people who we are serving. And we're serving them through a series of mechanisms, product driven and clinician driven. Um, but COVID really was the accelerant to do that. Now, when COVID hit, Hims and Hers was primarily a men's sexual health and hair business with a little bit of a derm business attached to it. Since then, we've expanded derm quite a bit. We've expanded Hers hair quite a bit, and of course, launched psychiatry and weight loss. And so the expansion of that, I think, is just underscoring the acceptance of virtual healthcare delivery models, especially in an asynchronous format, which is one of the unique drivers of efficiency and operational excellence for Hims and Hers.
What would you say is what patients are really looking for? How do you decide which areas to dive more into and explore?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about like category expansion within the Hims and Hers business. And I'd like maybe like take a step back from that because I think we think about category expansion very, very carefully, and we'll get to that as an answer. I think maybe taking a step back from that, prior in a few prior experiences, I was in more traditional consumer tech experiences. I was at Lyft. I was their first general manager back in 2016 in Northern California, which of course is home base for Lyft and Uber. Um, I was at a company called Munchery, which was in the food tech space. And I think the thing that was particularly interesting about those experiences was um, helping understand that while you're providing a product to a customer that is paying for it, you're also providing a service and a set of experiences. And in order to do so really well, you've got to be thoughtful about what you're able to do and what you're not able to do, and very, very clear about setting and managing those expectations with customers. Right. So, when we think about Hims and Hers, a lot of what we think about is what can we do really, really well? What is one circle of adjacency away from some of our core competencies? So I'll give an example. A couple years ago, um, mental health was a booming telehealth industry, sort of darling. There was a company called Cerebral that was doing a lot of work that was growing like crazy. A lot of companies were taking advantage of some of the relaxations of restrictions from a regulatory perspective to administer medications, via virtual telemedicine. And we thought long and hard about whether or not we should expand our psychiatric and mental health services to include controlled substances. Um, Ultimately, we decided not to. And we decided not to because those controlled substances were the types of engagements between clinicians and patients that require a lot deeper interaction, a lot more synchronous interaction that our current model has the ability to deliver at a high level of clinical excellence. So I think a large part of this is like not just what can you do, but what should you say no to, regardless of external market force pressures. And so we said no to it at the time. Of course, several of the companies that went very deep into the mental health space are no longer in existence or have significantly slowed down. Our decision at that point was fairly resolute, and so as we think about not just category expansion across categories, but even depth within a category, one thing we're extremely thoughtful about is what can we deliver that is one or maybe two circles of adjacency away from our current core competencies. The second thing we start to consider then is when we execute it, are we going to be able to do it at a very high quality bar? It's very different, I think, at an early stage company where you have some time and some maybe leeway to test and to experiment and to fall down. I think Hims with over 2.5 million subscribers, everything is fairly public. The moment you test something out, screenshots go up, Reddit threads go crazy. People know generally they're in a test of some way, shape, or form. And so being thoughtful about how and what you get into is a function of a fair amount of planning. But then also, how do you maintain that resilience to go test and go try things out? So, for example, when we launched weight loss, it was the first time that we ever did an injectable medication. Man, that's crazy. It's very different from taking, excuse me, a pill like an oral or a gummy. So, you can over optimize for things like the delivery mechanism, or you can focus on just getting something out there and focusing on the actual medication and the experience itself, which is what we have done, right? So for any people who are GLP customers of ours, you will get Becton Dickinson's branded syringes. You'll get, I think they're probably BD swabs, alcohol swabs, and then medication, right? And then the medication is in a bottle. Once we see that there is product market fit, then we think about optimizing that experience a lot more, right? You just have to have a baseline level of that experience, and then you can optimize from there, right? So, so now as we think about further expansion, of course, we just announced international. We announced a series of things in the last earnings call, and those are all carefully thought through. There's already fairly well laid plans behind the scenes on what I'll call it point one, look like for each of those. But each of those are creative and based off of the learnings of our existing core business models.
Love that. You kind of reflected this in your previous answer that you just provided, but I wanted to know, especially, I feel like it's reasonable to assume that post-COVID-19 mental health services did observe some sort of popularity, but I wanted to know, in this current environment, beyond perhaps like weight loss or anything else, are there any other areas in telemedicine that him and hers sees like the current most success?
Beyond weight loss?
Like beyond weight loss or perhaps mental health services, or is there any other sort of area of
Sorry.
telemedicine that maybe even we don't know about that might be very attractive or successful to patients?
Yeah, I think mental health is an interesting space because it is such a broad category, and it encompasses so many different facets of mental health. Right? There's psychiatry, there's psychology, there's therapy, there's so on and so forth. Like cognitive behavioral therapy. Really, the question becomes like, where in that space do you want to play? As we think about category growth from there, sometimes we think about, do we add to the bag, right? Do we add additional services within existing lines? So look at our like men's sexual health business, for example. We just last year or the year before launched something called Heart Health, right? Which is a novel compounded medication that combines both generic Viagra with statins. That's fairly novel, right? The reason for that is typically men who present with erectile dysfunction, who are north of 50 and presenting for the first time, erectile dysfunction is fundamentally a blood flow problem, right? And so with that, if you're presenting at that age, it's probably a leading indicator for some sort of cardiovascular deterioration. right? So it only makes sense then to potentially add statins into that medication. There's also a growing body of research that demonstrate that statin taken once or twice or 3 times weekly can deliver over 50% of the benefit of daily usage. Right. So now there's like sort of this novel set of data and research that are coming out that help us figure out, how do we think about better serving what our customer needs are? So, Sanjana, to your question around like category expansion,
Mhm.
a lot of it comes to like, what does the customer need? Where are things going, and how can we make it easier for customers to access the care that they need, that we can uniquely provide and deliver in a way that is differentiated? What we envision a future world of is hyper personalized, hyper precise medicine, right? So it's why we're going into labs, right? Tracking your labs and your own data over time allow you to compare yourself to yourself over time, rather than to the generic literature, right? Another part of this is clinical quality. So, any clinician you go to is a function of the series of experiences that they've had, their education, their patient panels, their existing research, and so on and so forth, right? But you can have two clinicians who sit side by side that may treat the exact same patient fairly differently. Um, that is inconsistency, and to me, that's a function of low quality. And not saying that both of them are low quality clinicians. I'm saying that it's fairly difficult for a patient then to be able to get a second opinion and then try to match those two opinions up. Which one do you trust? Which one do you not trust? A lot of that can come down to just patient comfort with the provider. So as we think about what clinical excellence and what clinical excellence looks like, it is consistency over time. It is accuracy and precision, right? And so as we build our models out and continue to expand them and think about, okay, well, which patient populations might be best suited for this combined heart health medication? Okay, great. Now let's go train the clinicians and help them understand the why. And a big part of this then becomes, we have sort of this vision around it. Clinicians have practice patterns that they have developed and perfected over years and years of practice. How do we help introduce them to some novel compounds and novel ways of delivering medication so that patients don't have to take 2, 3, 4 pills a day? Maybe they just take one gummy and one oral. And how do they think about a multifactorial diagnosis rather than a single shot diagnosis?
That is a lot of thinking clearly put behind all these different prescriptions and all the products that you offer your patients. And so, on top of that, I was curious as to a little bit more clarity on what the discussion really is around introducing these prescription drugs to your platform. And, like, do you guys work on these drugs in house? Do you collaborate with other people? And then also, in terms of GLP-1s, that does seem slightly different from some of your other targeted areas like erectile dysfunction and heart health. What made you decide to pursue GLPs as a whole?
A lot of partnership with our clinical advisors and our medical teams. We have I think, top-notch clinical team led by Dr. Pat Carroll, and a series of advisors who are some of the top clinicians across some of the top universities and medical centers in the world. And so there is a lot of collaboration with them to understand what are the medications and the new and the latest research that help us deliver better care to more patients more quickly. That collaboration is part of what lends itself to things like the heart health medication I was describing earlier. It lends itself to, hey, weight loss is actually a growing category. There are a series of opportunities within healthcare to deliver better outcomes to customers. A lot of people talk about GLP-1s when they talk about hims and hers because that is the catchy, in the headlines, splashy thing to talk about.
Yeah.
But the reality is, the orals business in weight loss is also fairly robust. People sometimes are afraid of injections. Sometimes people are price averse. GLPs are still, even though we're greatly reducing price relative to branded medications. Um, the orals are even cheaper than that, right? And so, what we think about is not just selling a medication, but solving an entire category, and doing so in a way that is true to the patients. Now, we thought about GLP-1s, and one of the things that became really interesting was the personalization component of it, right? Which fundamentally is what allows us to operate and sell compounded semaglutide, which is the chemical name for one of the GLP-1 medications. Of course, tirzepatide is the other one. Um, and and I'll describe this in sort of an example that I use a lot. Um, a lot of healthcare is hard coded, and it is static, and it is reactive. It is not proactive, and it's not dynamic. And so when I say that, what I mean is like Simone Biles and Shaquille O'Neal. When the day they both turned 18, if they went and bought a bottle of Tylenol, it would have told them both to take 2 tablets of Tylenol. And actually, the doctor would say, take 2 and call me in the morning, right? Very reactive, very static, right? Now, may have told Shaq take 3 or 4 or 5, who knows, right? But the point being, medicine is incredibly static that way, right? It is hard coded across what is finished clinical trials or made it through clinical trials, which of course have their own reasons for being designed the way that they're designed. What personalized medicine really is about is helping deliver the right medication at the right dosage at the right time to the right patient. And so as you think about the titration, you look at semaglutide, for example, there are 2 approved dosages of semaglutide, which is fairly ridiculous when you think about all the different body types and types of humans who are using GLP-1s. I think the reality is people need personalized doses that are somewhere between the 2. Sometimes the highest dose is intolerable. The lowest dose doesn't drive enough efficacy, and the reality lives probably somewhere in the middle. That happens more frequently than we think, right? And so, as we think about that, we talk a lot with our medical advisors and clinical advisors. What does this mean? How do we think about the clinical guidelines? What should providers be saying, thinking, doing? What information do we need from customers to help deliver better care and to help providers deliver that care to the patient? And so it really comes down to what does that interaction look like? And then how well versed are the providers in the clinical protocols with this new set of medications across multiple dosages and so on and so forth that they should be providing. Now, in some cases, some patients probably aren't good fits for GLP-1s. That's okay. They could be better fits for orals and the other way around as well. And so a lot of that comes to both listening to customers and listening to providers and really finding that middle ground to tune the experience for each person to be personalized for what their needs are.
Thank you, Mihir. I love the Simone Biles and Shaquille O'Neal analogy. That was a really great way to understand how like static healthcare delivery may seem, especially like in today's world. But it seems that from what you said and just from researching the core values of like him and hers, it's emphasized that this should be a personalized experience when approaching healthcare delivery. But some say, I guess, that telemedicine might be able to decrease personal connection just because of that physical distance between both the patient and the doctor. And I just wanted to know and was curious as to how him and hers may be working against that to actually build this connection between doctors and patients in this personalized space.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't necessarily disagree with that. That hypothesis, but I think there's a lot of nuance behind it. And when I say nuance, what I mean is the personalization and connection, I think, matter a lot in higher acuity environments. Think cardiology, think oncology, think OB. It's very different when you talk about low acuity medications. And low acuity meaning, more common ailments, right? Now, people who get the common cold or get the flu, go to urgent care, they get a prescription. They're not necessarily going to their PCP. They're not scheduling 3, 4, 5 weeks out in order to, by then they'll be through the flu, right? Whereas if you have a bespoke type of cancer or a specific cardiac condition, you are going to be going to the same cardiologist or oncologist or this, whatever that specialist is, time and again, and really rely on that specialization. And then there's everything in between, right? So healthcare, fundamentally, healthcare delivery is a spectrum, right? And so it was actually one of my questions coming into Hims and Hers, like, do patients prefer to have the same provider every time? And what we found time and again when we tested this is patients don't care necessarily exactly who their provider is. They actually care they're getting fast, high quality, clinically excellent responses. Things like if I'm on, let's say, Wellbutrin, can I drink wine with my Wellbutrin? Well, you don't need an MD to answer that question, and you don't need to wait 24 hours to answer that question. Now, most people probably turn to a browser to figure that out and crowdsource the answer. And sometimes they don't trust that and they still write in, right? But what they want is someone who is within the practice of the clinical caregiver and the care team to give them an answer with perspective around their entire clinical history, right? And so that ultimately, that speed of response and the excellence of the clinical excellence of the response are what matter in these lower acuity settings. Now, if it was like a bespoke specialist type condition, probably be willing to wait a little bit longer to have the same provider right back to you. But
Mhm.
there is a spectrum on those things.
Definitely. Thank you for your answer. I appreciate that.
You were mentioning that idea of patients wanting to have more trust and also just more accurate responses. And so we know recently you have launched MedMatch as an AI service to allow for these more precise diagnoses. But do you think that this helps in creating that personalized environment or it causes more distrust among patients?
Yeah, I think it actually does the former. Look, MedMatch and a lot of the AI capabilities that we are building, um, you know, those data are sourced from thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of patient interactions and journeys over time, not from one doctor's perspective based on their caseload and their practice patterns. Right? What you want to know is, based on people who are like me, what has been successful? What is likely to be the most successful? Now, if you go to one provider in one practice, their patient panel may not have a high population that look just like you, right? Or similar to you, right? What they're going to be doing is practicing based on the best available information they have in their head at the time, which um, can be amplified and augmented by then having real-time data saying, hey, given that this patient is presenting with X, Y, and Z, with these kinds of medications, with this kind of health history, we think these are the top 2 or 3 medications that could be the right medications for them. Which one do you think you should prescribe? Right. But it really is, think of this as like aiding the provider in delivering better care by not accidentally missing something or not taking into consideration something that's maybe buried on the 3rd page of an intake form. How do you surface just the information that is required to make a clinically relevant and accurate decision? So, the med match really, when you think about it, is twofold, right? It is aiding and assisting that provider, and the flip side of it, and frankly one place where we could do a lot better, is explaining to the customer why that medication is the right medication for them. So oftentimes, for anyone who's been through the Hims and Hers flow at all, you often check out with the medication that then gets sent to a provider to review, and the provider may or may not change the medication that you have chosen based on their clinical judgment, right? They prescribe based on their clinical judgment. I think a place where we could probably get a lot better is explaining to the customer why the medication they checked out with might be the best medication, or why the medication that was provided to them or prescribed to them is the best medication for them. So this is really like exciting days, frankly, with like AI and sort of where we are in this information journey. I think there's a ton of opportunity for developing companies, products, businesses that can help assist customers along their own healthcare journey. So very exciting time for y'all to be in college.
I know, I feel like AI has grown so much over the years, so it's definitely really interesting too, because people also go to ChatGPT for advice nowadays, and we don't necessarily know where they get that information from because they can take from sources like Reddit and other maybe less qualified sources. And so I was curious, how do you go about filtering that data that you use? Do you have like a specific database where you make sure that prescriptions are correct or accurate based on previous prescribers, or what is the process around that?
Yeah, there's a couple of those, and you're right. I mean, my son burned his hand the other day. We were cooking, and he burned his hand, and I was like, okay, we can either go to urgent care and wait for several hours, or I can just upload the picture to ChatGPT and then filter through the responses and figure out what I should be doing next, right? Um, and just given kind of where I sit in the healthcare economy, I'm probably a bit more educated of a consumer when I read, what the results are. But you're right, a lot of people are turning to, their computers to figure out what they should be doing next. And you're right, there are sometimes some false positives and false negatives that come through just based on the sourcing from those. Um, at Hims and Hers, we used our own internal data, and we use clinical literature to drive a lot of the clinical decision making. Our clinical protocols are approved by a series of MDs who are licensed across multiple states, and reviewed very thoroughly before making it a formal clinical protocol. We then have a series of quality checks across the organization that help us understand when there are aberrations to clinical decision making, and why those are happening, which then help us either further improve the med match and some of the AI capabilities, refine our clinical protocols, and also then help coaches, help coach providers on clinical practice and consistency around precision and accuracy.
It's obvious that the introduction of AI, especially in telehealth, is very, very much booming. And I wanted to know, in what other ways do you see the industry growing, whether that be through AI or any sort of other space within the industry, and what jobs do you think will emerge from that space?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think one of the first studies I wrote back in the early 2000s was two studies. One was the promise of consumer-driven healthcare has finally arrived. Um, I was about 25 years early for that. And the second one that I wrote was around providers, specifically nursing shortages, and around recruitment and retention. And really, the challenge has been, with the pricing and cost pressures, the shortage of clinical expertise is rampant, right? That is a big part of what's driving costs up. It is part of what's driving costs up. And so you hear this term in healthcare called top of license. How do you help clinicians practice as close to top of license as possible? Your cardiologist is not taking your blood pressure when you walk into her office, right? However, a PA could do that, right? A physician's assistant could do that. So how do you help then maximize the amount of time based on the experience and the qualifications of the individual who's delivering care? AI is really helping a lot of that, right? It's helping triage people to the right places at the right time. It also is kind of hurting that a little bit, right? Because people are doing their own research. Dr. Google started this a long time ago. Dr. AI, Sanjana, to your point, can be amplifying some of those challenges, some of those problems. And I can tell you from hundreds and thousands of conversations with clinicians, man, do they really not love when a patient comes in and says, I read this on the internet. But what AI will help us do in the healthcare economy is deliver what I talked about a bit earlier, which is deliver the why with backed research on the why. Now, when a clinician only has, let's say, 8, 12, 14 minutes with a patient, and they have to convey a series of information while also gathering information from that patient, it's very hard to be complete, right? It's hard to be, um, as thorough as you want to be. As a patient, it's very difficult to digest all information and then understand what questions you should be asking, then ask those questions and get answers and have that dialogue in that period of time, right? What AI is going to help us do is make those conversations longitudinal. I imagine many of you who've gotten prescriptions in the past or gotten diagnoses in the past, kind of like shell shocked when you get the diagnosis. You don't know what questions to ask. You kind of fill the time a little bit. Then you go to the grocery store to pick up your prescription or the pharmacy, or you're out later that day or the next day and you're like, oh, I have these 5 questions. You do some research. I have these next 10 questions, right? AI is going to help us then deliver the answers to those questions in a way that is filtered and approved by your provider and so on and so forth, right? And then will help you track yourself longitudinally. So I think about the types of jobs that get created. Some of them are still the same jobs that exist today. They just become much more scalable in the way that exists. So for folks who are thinking about going to med school, will the role of the primary care provider change? 100% will change. Now we talk about these bespoke specialists, maybe a little bit less so in the early days of AI, meaning the next 5-ish years. But certainly primary care is going to change on its face 10 times out of 10. And I think going into primary care is going to be a very exciting place to be, because now you're going to have customers who have access to a lot more information and data that you ideally will be controlling as a clinician, because they're coming to your platform or to your site or to your, digital practice, if you will, to engage on those answers, right? And so I think, as far as clinicians go, I don't see the jobs, like the names of the jobs changing, but I see the nature of those jobs changing pretty dramatically. Outside of that, man, the access to data and the freeness and willingness with which consumers are sharing data in this day and age. I mean, I uploaded a picture of my son's like burn right to the internet. It's like, okay, like where is that going? Where is that hosted? Who has that? Now, in some cases, some of those data are extremely sensitive and private. And what I'm seeing is that people maybe don't have the right filters in place on who and where they're sharing what information with. So I suspect over time, we will see things that are much more personalized, like a like a personalized longitudinal health map, right, for an individual tracking themselves over time, right? You can see that there are these journeys that help you predict what is likely to happen to you next so that you can then take the actions you need to take to engage on that. We can think about that in short, medium, and long term as well, right? Short term, you're already seeing some of the biometrics, like with the Aura ring. Hey, your biometrics are a little bit off. You seem like maybe you're getting a little bit sick. Take a little bit of rest today. You can see in the medium term, a little bit more so. I'm now squarely middle aged. Um, like, what are the things I should be doing for my annual physical, colonoscopy, this, that, and the other? And then you can think about the long term. And of course, longevity is like the big hot thing right now, right? What should I be doing today to prepare myself for 20 and 30 and 40 years from now, right? But this healthcare journey is really longitudinal. It's not point in time. And so as you think about the types of jobs that could create and types of opportunities, it is not treating a person at a point in time, it is treating the person at that point in time as a function of their health span and their lifespan, right? And so the jobs that get created will be built around that.
It's absolutely insane to think about all these different ways that you can see growth. And that's literally just in this field of telehealth. Like, I can't even begin to imagine all the ways that the world will see growth in terms of technology and AI in the future. But now that we've talked a little bit more about growth, we also wanted to go back and talk with you about some reflections you have over your life. And so we were curious, like, did you have any early career challenges that have helped to guide you in your role today? And what were some lessons that you took from those?
Yeah, I had a lot, um, a lot of them. Um, I think one of the interesting inflection points in my career was coming out of a rotational program at Abbott Labs. I was here in the Bay Area at the time, and I realized, I've worked on the services side in healthcare. I've worked in the biopharma side. I've worked in med tech. Worked on the payer side. Like, I sort of worked across the healthcare economy. I don't really want to work in healthcare anymore. I kind of want to go try consumer tech out. And one of the big challenges I had was, anyone who looked at my resume would just quickly say, "You're a healthcare industry guy. Like, just stay in healthcare, or you can't possibly fathom what we're doing in this other industry." And I think the reality is, while there is some level of subject matter expertise, understanding the core fundamentals and mechanics of business models and how they're evolving and changing over time, the diversity of those sets of experiences enable, at least me, to think a little bit broader around strategic opportunities within companies that I work for. Um, and so a lot of the learnings I gained from my time at Lyft, my time at Munchery, are being applied right now as I think about the consumer experience in healthcare at Hims and Hers. Um, and so I think when I talk to students and sort of early graduates, there's a lot of pressure on getting the exact right job and having the exact right title and the right experience and the right location. And I think that's fine. We think about short, medium, and long term. I also think about, like, your career as a long term, right? Probably statistically speaking, the majority of people who are graduating college today are going to work for 60-ish years, post graduation. That's a crazy number to think about when you're 21 or 22 years old, right? That you're going to be working for the next 60 years potentially if you want to. So really, thinking about your career as a series of rotational programs where you're gathering experiences, where you're understanding, what you're gaining from that experience, and then what do you want to gain in your next experience. It's pretty rare these days that someone stays at a company for 10, 15, 20 years. The generation before mine, that was very common. You went to a big company, you stayed somewhere stable, you worked your way up over time. Now it's much faster pace, right? The cycle time is much quicker, right? And the ability to take chances has never been more accessible than it is today. And so, I think from like 2001 when I graduated to today, that has been a fundamental shift in like the early stages of careers where the ability, the opportunity cost to take chances has really dropped dramatically. Um, and so no longer do you have to explain to people, well, I was here for 2 years, I was there for 3 years, I was there for 3 years. That's like table stakes now. People just expect that's going to be kind of how careers, continue to evolve. And so, as I reflect back on it, um, I'm pretty proud of taking a lot of chances, working at earlier stage companies, shifting industries, where at the time it seemed crazy to some folks who maybe had more traditional experiences or approaches to their own career development. But for me, it was what was interesting and exciting, right? I think curiosity is something that you should never lose. Go back to the beginning of the podcast, I was curious about a series of different things before undergrad, in undergrad, and now even post undergrad, right? The ability to continue to ask questions of other people, to have some of those thoughtful conversations, to revisit your own beliefs and your own ideals, and figure out which ones are priority now, which ones are priorities later, and continue to grow, right? And we talk about growth mindset a lot, right? Just in general and in society, we talk about growth mindset. Not losing that becomes incredibly important. And so as I reflect back on it, I never really thought of my career as a rotational program, but it is. I think careers are just generally one long rotation.
Thank you, Mihir. I love that perspective, viewing the structure as like rotational programs and that everything's not so locked in, because I feel that, I mean, at least I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure that other students may resonate with this as well, but I don't find myself engaging in curiosity as much, just because I feel that like, at least maybe in the culture that I surround myself in, I feel that like I have to make this certain decision to last me, for these next 60 years of my life. But it's refreshing to hear that that's not entirely your experience, and that that's not what the experience of many others is looking like right now. But
Well,
my
what's interesting about that, Anthony, is being here in the Bay Area is really like the heart of innovation on a lot of things. And what I've seen time and again is people feel trapped into pathways that they expect that they should have, or that other people expect they should have of themselves. And there's a term that a friend of mine used. It's called the Ivy trap, right? Which is, okay, like, where are my classmates
heard of
working?
that one.
Okay, I need to go work at one of those places. Okay, who's getting
Yeah.
promoted? I need to go get promoted. I need to follow these pathways, right? And what that does is it funnels a group of really highly talented individuals into these pathways that are known and that are sure. And there's a psychology behind that I think is so interesting,
Mhm.
which is, um, you know, y'all got to these top universities by studying hard, by taking the tests, by doing the extracurriculars, by figuring out the formula, acing the formula, going to where you're going next, right? Um, but the people who don't follow those pathways are the ones who really drive innovation and really drive like the next set of interesting thinking in the world. And it's very easy to fall into that trap. The promotion is there, the paycheck is there, the bonus is there, whatever it might be. But then at the end of the day, you find yourself 20 or 30 years into your career and you're like, wait a minute, I'm like, could have done all these other interesting things, right? I think there's a
100%.
lot of talent that's wasted on innovation by people who fall
Mhm.
into this trap of just following that pathway time and again. One of my classmates from Duke, a very close friend of mine, his name is Sonny Cabrowal, is a serial entrepreneur, has been since college. Went to law school because it was a thing to do. I remember we lived in DC at the time, and he was like, "Man, I like really don't want to be a lawyer." Ended up getting a job at a law firm. Like, I can't wait to leave this job. And then he went and started a company, and now he's a serial entrepreneur. Right? It was in his blood. He couldn't wait to go do it. Right? Like he had to do it. Um, and that fortitude is something that is unique to a certain subset of folks. I'd love to see a broader subset of talent take some of those chances and realize that that chance that you take is just one step in your journey. And you can always take another step in another direction when you want to. But at a certain point, when you're much later in your career, the opportunity cost for taking those chances is much, much higher.
Mhm.
When you have a mortgage, when you have to pay for kids' school, when you have to pay for medical bills and this, that, and the other, maybe those opportunity costs are a little bit different. Um, and so, what I'd encourage more people to do who are younger and earlier in their careers is to take more chances with the recognition that there's no such thing as a bad step. There's just learning processes. And those learning processes help you develop into a much better, fuller version of yourself as you get later in life.
Definitely. Thank you, Mihir. And I think we need to like integrate that into like, culture now, at least like within prestigious university culture, because that's something that I feel that not many of us realize right now.
But take the chances. Like you'll never regret taking a chance. Business school reunion. I saw this guy who gave a speech at one of our graduation ceremonies. And the speech was super interesting. It kind of relates to the Ivy Trap a little bit. He talked about how, we're graduating from our MBA program. And up until this time, we've always had these measuring sticks, right? getting into a good college, getting a good internship, getting a good job, getting into the top, one of the top business schools. But now we're graduating, and what we define as success is fundamentally different. And there's no more measuring sticks. Like, we're all going to go to our own paces of like having a family, having kids, our own career arcs, our own career. There's no like linear measuring stick anymore, the way that we've had with our peers, up until this point. So how do you define what success looks like?
Mhm.
And what does success look like to you going forward? At that point, we're all in our late 20s, early 30s. And it's something I think a lot about for your younger generation, right? Like people who are in their teens and their 20s, is how you define success is super interesting and super important, because it should be solely your definition of success, not someone else's definition of success for you. And
100%.
oftentimes it's a pathway that sometimes, especially for immigrant families, like it's not a pathway that you necessarily know or that you have access to with your network to help you understand, like, that's cool. It's okay. You can go do that. And so I think it is a different pathway, right? And how you define and measure what that pathway, success in that pathway looks like, is super important. The definition of success, can evolve, certainly should evolve over time. Mine has. But it shouldn't be, it should be fairly dynamic, but it should be thoughtful about what do I think I want going forward.
I feel like in college, there are a lot of students who feel like they can't really fail. A lot of people do have that self-importance that you were talking about, where they're like, oh, I got this really good internship. I'm set up for the rest of my life. But when you left Duke and Wharton, were there any hard truths that you had to come to terms with after leaving such a prestigious university?
I like never really compared myself to the person next to me, um, from an early age. So I never, I was generally kind of happy for my friends who were successful. And I found, especially, I'm now 25 years out of undergrad, um, the people who were, you know, potentially on the surface really happy for a period of time, under the surface are sometimes not very happy. Um, and and I think, going through the journey together with your friends, I talked with Gabby a lot about this at one point, but like, your friends from college know you at a period of time, when in some ways you are like your most authentic self, right? You're like kind of like really in like this growth phase where that group of folks who's a shotgun, the people you're friends with from undergrad are going to shotgun to all these different career pathways that are very different from like these linear pathways of like post MBA. There's like 5 or 6 general career pathways, right? It's like entrepreneurship, consulting, banking, blah, 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 right? General management. Whereas undergrad, people shotgun to like law school, business school, med school, entrepreneurship. They go 50 different industries and ways from Sunday, right? Um, and and so it's really easy to be happy for people when they are successful in what they want to do. As you continue to talk to your friends, or I talk to my friends, you find like everyone kind of has similar struggles. It's just like different flavors of the same candy, right? It's like they're having trouble with their relationship, with their parents, with their kids, with work, whatever it is. Fundamentally, those challenges are very, very similar, right? And they translate across, right? So then you can connect with people in a way that maybe gives you a slightly different perspective on the challenges you're facing, yourself. And then also like goal setting, right? Like, how do people think about goal setting? How do people think about success? What do those challenges in their lives or in your life tell you about what success really means? Um, and and so I think some of those hard truths, come to bear when you're not very comfortable with where those things are, or some of the decisions maybe that you've made. Which is why thinking about success in advance of it and what it means to you, I think probably helps reduce some of that regrets, or things that you wish you maybe did differently, rather than learning from those and figuring out how to do it differently on your next step. But yeah, I wish I wasn't a
Perfect.
chemistry major.
Well,
It took a lot
good
of
to
time.
know.
It took a
I
lot
guess
of
none of
time.
us should switch into chemistry.
Do they still have like the freshman advisory counselors? FACs is what we call them.
Mm,
Where
I'm trying to.
sophomores help freshmen move in, and then like you have like a group of freshmen that
Oh,
you're
yeah, those
like,
are like the O leaders and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
like the orientation leaders are those who like
yeah,
help freshmen move in.
Mhm.
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe it's like
I,
like
I,
it's kind of different now.
I did that, and actually, like two of my groomsmen were guys who were in the class below me, who I
Wow.
just became like super super close friends with.
Like while you're moving them in.
Yeah, yeah. While I was moving him in,
Dang.
and then they both ended up coming to Wayne, and we just became friends for life.
I love that. That's
Interesting.
so cool.
I
So
guess
maybe
this is
one advice for folks at Duke is like spend as much time on campus as you can. It's a magical
No,
place.
it
definitely.
really
That's
is.
something that kind of like I think I still did that like in my freshman year, but like there were certain things I just didn't do because I just thought, okay, that's not gonna help me like become more successful. It's not gonna advance me in a sort of way. Just like the fear of like being perceived sometimes. But like this year, I was like, I'm just gonna join like a dance group because I really like to dance. But like I've just never thought I was like gonna do that because I was like, why would I dance? Like there's no point in doing that. But like there's like this really cool Latin dance group that like caught my eye at the end of the school year that I went to. I don't know if you know Sabro Sura Santina, but
Yes.
like
I started the Bhangra team at Duke
Are you
back in
serious?
the day. Yeah.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was a long time ago. And so like Diwali was like it was a big deal. I'm sure it is.
Wow.
But yeah, dude, Anthony, go dance, go do it. I actually like I
yeah.
ran for student government at Wharton. I never wanted to run for student government to your point of like taking chances. I was actually like really afraid to fail in front of my classmates, like go run for something super publicly and then not win. It's like I was like very nervous about that. Also, like I just thought student government didn't really do a whole lot. But someone who later has now become like one of my closest friends was convinced me to run as his vice president. And it was like very public, and we ended up winning. And it was one of the running was one of the best experiences of my life. Like you just putting yourself out there. I think recognizing that like no one actually like it's actually like kind of cool. Like no one actually cares if you're like they just most people kind of care about their own success, right? Or like they're like inspired by other people who take those chances to go do the things that are interesting for them. And like when you can have the humility to go do that, it taught me a ton of humility to like go through that process. And it turned out like we won. That was great. We actually won by like a handful of votes, like a single digit number of votes, because
Wow.
we were like campaigning up until like the buzzer, till probably like 5 minutes after the buzzer. But it's like running through the finish line was like one of the takeaways there.
Wow.
But man, you should totally do that. You should absolutely do that and try to get into an Indian dance too, because those are pretty fun. Those
Wait,
practices
Okay.
can be intense though.
definitely. I love that. Thank you for tuning in to the Commerce of Care podcast. See you guys next month.